So, a quick heads up, I found this film on my camera roll while cleaning my phone out after someone sent it to me about a year or so ago. I can't remember who it was who sent it my way, and I can't remember if they sent it to me as a recommendation to check it out, or if they sent it to me to show me what they were planning on covering. After asking around my friend circles and some regulars, no one I speak to regularly seemed to recognise this film, and I can't see anyone I know who's covered it, so I'm going to take the plunge with this one. If you did send it to me, please let me know in the comments, as I'd really love to thank you properly. Anyway, on with the show. So one of the questions I get asked semi-regularly is why I don't cover more modern films on this channel. It's a fair question. With more films than ever being released these days, the scope you'd think I'd be dealing with should mean I'd have more than my hands full. But the honest answer is, I have no aversion to covering modern films. I just find that modern films are a bit more of a minefield when it comes to dealing with quality. I don't have many hard and fast rules for what I will and won't cover on here, but one of them is I won't talk about what I would call manufactured bad movies. What I mean by that is films that were, from the ground up, designed to try and be so bad it's good. I find them more often than not to be very insincere, and in all honesty, the fun just isn't there for me. To me, the reason a bad movie can be entertaining is because someone believed in it sincerely at one point or another. Somewhere in the production, someone was trying the best they could to make a good movie. And that backfired, creating the lightning in a bottle that I so desperately crave. So when entire film companies like Asylum or Latter Day Full Moon or Troma set their entire careers on producing movies that are purposefully unwatchable, filmed by people who can't be arsed with over-the-top premises that no one at any stage in the production ever believed would make a good movie, I find the entire experience leaves a bad taste in my mouth. So by and large, I leave them be. They're not my scene. And that's fine. But that doesn't mean I don't like to occasionally lift my head above the parapet and take one for the team, in the hopes that a new golden age of schlock is upon us. Sometimes I find genuinely great movies like the WNUF Halloween special. Sometimes I find entertaining dross like White Glove Massive. And sometimes we end up with today's movie. 2019's A Karate Christmas Miracle is a disorienting experience, to say the least, and one that somehow made me long for the days that I could return to my treasured pile of dumped-on-DVD movies from the 70s, 80s and 90s. And potential spoilers ahead, because I can't really talk about this properly without spoiling some of the bizarre twists in this thing. The plot is relatively straightforward. The film follows Abby, a hard-working businesswoman and single mother to Jesse, a boy who seemingly only has one set of clothes. Seriously, he wears this for almost the entire movie. Last Christmas, Jesse's dad Bob was involved in a mass shooting at a cinema at Christmas while leading a safety talk. Yeah, that's where we're going with this thing right out of the gate. The film isn't entirely clear on the details, but I presume that a body was never found because Jesse is convinced that his dad is still out there. And while Abby is less confident that Bob's still alive, she doesn't seem to know for sure either. Anyway, the film opens with Christmas imminently on its way and Jesse hard at work on a special project. You see, Jesse's been having strange, nightmarish dreams. And in one of them he was told that if he completes 12 tasks during the 12-day lead up to Christmas, his dad'll come back. The big challenge out of all of this being for Jesse to achieve his black belt in karate. Abby's skeptical that he'll do it, but she supports her son as best she can. Abby begins to become increasingly concerned about her son's visions, as he claims he's having dreams where he's in the theatre as the shooting is happening, and some of the details are a little too accurate to what actually happened. So, she decides to try and do something about it. and heads to the local school to chat to a teacher running the legal classes named Elizabeth. Elizabeth has a shadowy past. Before becoming a teacher, she used to be a psychic, who correctly predicted years previously that Abby would get married, have a kid, and that her partner would go on a somewhat perilous journey. Now, Abby wants Elizabeth to try and make sense of Jesse's visions to see whether Bob is in fact still alive. But Elizabeth's reluctant to help, as she's trying to leave her psychic life in the past after one too many encounters with the police looking for missing persons that resulted in dead bodies being found. Abby leaves somewhat crestfallen, but Elizabeth reconsiders when she gets a vision from a knife that was at the scene of the shooting. Together, the pair slowly try to piece together anything they can about Bob's disappearance and whether he may or may not still be alive. As Christmas gets closer and evidence that Bob is actually still alive grows scarcer and scarcer, Abby begins to lose hope that Elizabeth is going to be able to help, eventually telling her to just forget she ever came to her and leaving things in favour of trying to calm her son down and get Christmas back on track. But when Elizabeth starts to receive strange visions in line with Jesse's, it's down to the ex-psychic to convince Abby to get back on the case, finish the final hurdle, and figure out once and for all just what happened to her husband last Christmas. In a film that, well, it's not very good, and it falls off the rails in the last 5 minutes, so don't get too invested in all honesty. Script-wise, we have a mess on our hands. A film that barely keeps it together for 10 minutes, let alone 85, and regularly pads itself out with meaningless and sometimes inaudible scenes that go nowhere and add nothing to proceedings. A more than decent chunk of this film is entirely occupied by Abby and Elizabeth just monologuing to each other. Not having a conversation, monologuing. Monologuing about their lives, their families, problems they have, but with no flow or purpose beyond time killing and trying to expand this film's universe on a budget that clearly will not allow that. There really doesn't feel like a solid act structure. The introductions take way too long, the middle is meandering and doesn't add anything of value to proceedings, and the ending is incoherent, rushed, and has a twist that I'll get into shortly that literally made me shout, "Oh, fuck off," at the screen in absolute bewilderment. The biggest problem I think this film has is that its script really doesn't seem to know exactly what it wants to be. On the one hand, it's supposed to be a Christmas film. The central concept of this movie is Jesse has to get a black belt before Christmas so his dad can come back. But apart from that central pillar and that visually most scenes have a ton of Christmas decorations shoved into them, this really could be a film that happened at any time of year. It doesn't feel like a Christmas movie. That's the other problem with this script, the weird quasi-faux Twin Peaks nightmare vision sequences. They get a significant amount of screen time, but they add very little to the actual main plot. And at first, I figured it just looked like a convenient way to get Eric Roberts into the film without having him visit a set. But after doing some digging, it appears that almost all of these scenes with Roberts and the theatre were actually transplanted into this from another movie, 2016's Joker's Wild, also known as Joker's Poltergeist, which is a film about a guy in a clown mask performing a shooting in a cinema. Yes, they literally just recycled old footage into this movie so they could shove Eric Roberts onto the box art. And as a result, those scenes really jar with the rest of the plot of the film and feel totally irrelevant and out of place. Because they are. But this film's worst crime script-wise has got to be the absolutely appalling ending. So buckle up, ladies and gents, because this thing gave me whiplash when they did it. Right. So after travelling around town together for a while, Abby and Elizabeth head to a bar, where Elizabeth has said that the answers about Bob will finally be answered. Around the second act, we're told that Elizabeth was engaged, but that she called things off after getting a vision that her fiancé was going to be killed. While the pair are in the bar waiting for a sign from Bob, Elizabeth spots her fiancé having drinks with a woman. She approaches him and she finds out that the woman he's drinking with is now married to him and that they have a kid together. Elizabeth is stunned and returns to Abby while still trying to register what's just happened, and basically tells Abby that it's entirely possible that her vision in this case has been somewhat warped. That she was seeing her fiancé as dead and Bob as alive, when really it was the other way around. Abby accepts that this probably is the case and decides to just cut her losses, head home and try and have a good Christmas with Jesse. We then cut to Christmas morning, and Jesse is preparing for his final test. He has to break a board to pass and get his belt. Jesse breaks the board, and out of fucking nowhere, his dad comes back with no explanation, which then hard cuts to credits. Why is that weird? Because the questions it creates breaks the film fundamentally. Where's he been for the last year? Why hasn't he bothered to contact his family in any meaningful way? The method he did use to contact them, if Jesse's dreams were actually forms of contact, why did he speak in such a cryptic manner? Does this mean the weird, creepy Twin Peaks theatre scenes weren't just visions but were an actual place? If so, did an entire theatre of people end up trapped in a void? Why was something so arbitrary as getting a black belt key to releasing his dad from this weird spiritual plane? If the psychic's been doing this for years, why didn't she make Abby aware that there's a weird spiritual plane where people can get permanently trapped inside? If Bob was in a weird alternate existence, why did he have so much influence in the real world, including making sure his phone was left with a diner owner who knew Abby and could explain more details, and giving Elizabeth enough information to go and hunt down a community gardens that was supported by Bob without Abby knowing anything about it in any meaningful way? It can be read as one of two ways in my mind. Either Bob's been in hiding for 12 months, in which case, why? Why has he done this to his family? What did he have to gain in hurting so many people on a deep emotional level? Or the other way is that he's been trapped in an astral plane for 12 months, in which case the film stopped at possibly the most interesting moment. Do I want to watch a 90-minute film where the A-plot is a single mum wondering if her husband's dead or not, and the B-plot is a precocious tyke trying to earn his black belt in time for Christmas? No, I want to see the Extro-esque movie about a father who mysteriously disappeared Christmas time last year, who then mysteriously reappeared at Christmas time this year with little to no explanation, and the bizarre, absurdist nightmare journey that the family go through in not only reintegrating a father who's seen some shit, but also maybe exploring the astral plane themselves and all the bizarreness it holds. It's just, I feel like the film could have taught the lesson that Christmas is with the family you have and a time to remember those we've lost. But instead, by forcing the dad's return, it completely lost any kind of message, and I feel so sorry for widowed parents out there who watch this film with their kids and end up having to have a long conversation with them that their mother, father or sibling isn't now trapped in some nightmarish astral world, and the only way to get them back is to get really good at karate. And it would be amiss of me not to mention that the dialogue stinks to high heaven, in my opinion. It's over-explanatory, unfunny, dry, and border robotic at times. As mentioned, more than a decent chunk of this conversational dialogue isn't written like conversational dialogue. It's just cast members monologuing to each other. But even when that isn't happening, the whole thing just feels totally first draft. I mean, the performances don't help, more on that later, but eesh, this feels like a script written by someone who's never had a normal interaction before. On scripting duties, we have 3 writers, Ken Del Vecchio, David Landau and Julie Kimmel, who also handles direction duties. Ken has 26 writing credits. Of note are titles such as The Rules for Men, which, I mean, just look at this thing. And he also seems to have several writing credits for pro-life, godsploitation style movies, which was a major red flag for me going into this one. David has 8 writing credits, but at least 4 and potentially as many as 6 of them are all for interactive DVD games. Basically trivia discs or choose-your-own-adventure type stories, with this movie being his most recent effort at the time of writing. As for Julie, she has 1 writing credit, which is for this film, and I believe her involvement in the writing may have been more of a on-the-day type affair. maybe helping with some improvised sequences, additional dialogue, that kind of stuff. On the directing front, she's only doing marginally better, with 2 credits, one for this film and one for a film called Caretaker, which I can't seem to find any information about other than it came out in 2020. And on the directing front, things aren't that great either. This is a first-time feature effort from Kimmel, and while I've definitely seen worse, I feel very confident in saying that this is a film student-grade operation in my opinion. And I say this as someone who regularly screens student films. The movie regularly struggles with composition, which I found incredibly irritating. The most noticeable one being a crane or drone tracking shot of a house near the beginning which just has no focal point. And that incident isn't isolated either. The film on the whole just lacks that clear style or vision that an experienced director could have offered. It feels rushed in places, it feels badly composed and poorly visualised. I don't know whether there was a misinterpretation of the shot list, I don't know if there were issues translating what they wanted with what was possible, but what I do know is, what I saw in this film, while functional, is not pretty and is really missing any kind of impact or defining mark. It's just fairly bland. Not totally incompetent, but lacking, well, direction. And what's said for the visuals can also be applied to the cast, with almost everyone in this film seemingly quite uncertain about what they can and can't do. There's a serious lack of physical presence for most of the cast, and whereas a steady guiding hand would have really helped to make some of these sequences pop a bit more with feeling or vibrance, here, at best the performances are passable and at worst they're lifeless and just look a bit drab. And these issues snowball into the cine as well, where we find what I affectionately refer to as the lump hammer approach. Outside of the nightmare sequences, everything is wide, mid-wide or 2-shot reverses, and that's it. We have long shots that just run for an absolute eternity, with no cuts or breaks to help give the film a bit more life or flow. There are just some scenes that desperately would have benefited from more cuts, more angles, just a bit more creative flair. But here, it's the bare minimum for about 80% of the runtime, with the nightmare sequences going too far in the other direction, resulting in an incoherent barrage of imagery and visuals that left me confused and irritated more than anything else. The two contrast each other in a fairly noxious way that left me pretty underwhelmed, with more questions than answers. And only further enhancing the craptitude of this production, the lighting for some of these scenes is positively shocking. It's all pretty much floodlit, everything looks cool or white, with no attempt being made to hide shadows or try anything new or interesting with gels. It just looks like they've lit the shot so that the camera can see people and then they've gone for a take. Totally uninspired, and frankly, to me at least, it just looks naff. With even a little more creative direction, they really could have at least made the sets look Christmassy, feel warmer or more inviting. But no, instead it's just flat and lifeless. Performance-wise, it's a washout. A relative of the writer of this film, Mario Del Vecchio, plays Jesse, and I have a rule about how I treat child actors. So, what I will say is, the role required a precocious and rambunctious kid who was unwavering in his beliefs, and I'm going to offer constructive criticism to the actor. I'll say that for roles like this, it's better to play that kind of role with a softer but determined sincerity rather than a strong-headed one. He's had 12 acting roles in films so far, and I'd say he's well on his way to defining himself, but less in a performance is sometimes significantly more. And I'd also add that natural physicality is very hard to master in a good performance. I'd like to hope that there's a bright future for him going forward, but these early films are a learning curve, and these are the best times to explore and hone a craft. As for the rest of the cast, well, Eric Roberts gets top billing in this movie, despite the fact that the footage used wasn't for this film. It's not the worst I've seen of him, but the problem is it's so incoherent and disconnected from the rest of the film that I really just don't know why he's in this movie outside of it being a credit to sell the movie on. Equally, Mila Milosevic gives a yawning performance as Abby, barely holding my interest through the majority of the scenes she's in and offering what is quite possibly the worst drunk acting I've seen in a movie released in the last 35 years. And that's saying something. At first, I thought she was playing Jesse's older sister and was stunned when it was revealed she was playing his mum. She really struggled to physically emote through this film, and while she managed to audibly emote most of the time, physically she might as well have been on the astral plane with Bob. A total non-performance that I feel has to be partly down to the lack of support from the director, as there are repeated scenes where she just looks quite lost. Julie McCulloch is a presence in this film, and quite a vibe too. Giving off drunken aunt at a party vibes for pretty much the entire run of the film, when she isn't giving a cringeworthy and possibly improvised performance, she's traumatising school kids, doing shots and feigning interest in the movie. She swings wildly between being too animated and not animated enough, and that all over the place-ness just left me having no idea what her character really even stood for. The film doesn't even really resolve her character's problems. She finds out her fiancé didn't die, and that's pretty much the last we hear of her, really. And she's the best performance in this thing. So, yeah, that was quite a spectacle to see. And finally, as an aside, the supporting cast are completely underwhelming. Not a single interesting performance in the bunch. Some are introduced with a strong hint that they'll be a key player, only to then leave and never come back. Others are seen for literally a single shot and add nothing and tell us nothing. It's such a mess, just honestly. Finally, the soundtrack. And what a mundane slog this thing is. It's predominantly Christmas songs, and they have a composer for this film, but it's all just fairly flat traditional renditions of carols. The kind of stuff you can literally get in the YouTube audio library for free. It does nothing for the film other than further emphasise just how much of a kick up the arse this film really truly needed. Flat as a fart and with all the welcoming of 1-2, this score was rubbish. And really was the cherry on the cake for what was, in my opinion, a dismal production. A Karate Christmas Miracle was premiered at the Hoboken International Film Festival, and as a bit of an attempt to curry favour, some of the cast in the film can be seen wearing Hoboken International Film Festival t-shirts, often against their characters' interests. Anyway, it premiered there in 2019 before arriving on Apple TV, Google Play and Amazon Video on December the 1st, 2019. It may or may not have also been screened on the Family Channel at some point. I'm finding conflicting reports, but it has got a television rating of TV14, so I assume it must have been broadcast somewhere. Other than that though, I've seen a few images of a Blu-ray release floating around, but I can't find anywhere selling it, and I can't find any information of a DVD release either, so yeah, it's pretty slim pickings on this front. It's fair to say that I didn't get on with A Karate Christmas Miracle, a film that barely felt like a Christmas film despite visual evidence to the contrary. It was a dull, confusing and overly long mess of a movie with flat lifeless direction, flat lifeless cine and flat lifeless performances married to an unmemorable score and an ending which forced me to take my blood pressure medication. And I don't like taking my blood pressure medication. One to avoid, it's not entertainingly awful, it's not funny, it's not a challenge, and it's not worth your time. It's about 85 minutes you almost certainly could put to better use. And the perfect example of a bait title designed to pull people in with the promise of a far better movie than what was delivered. Give it a miss.